Even in an AI-focused world, MacroEdge is in the business of focusing on you. We don't just understand our clients, we listen to what's said and illuminate on what's not. In a world moving at the speed of light, with shifting markets, evolving workforces, and non-stop disruption, MacroEdge helps you to navigate and identify novel opportunities, expand your enterprise, and succeed in tomorrow's world. And it all starts with you. Put your enterprise and your perspective in the driver's seat. We're in the business of you.
And good evening, everyone. Welcome to MacroEdge Radio. This is John Galt speaking, and tonight is a very special night. As many of you may or may not know, I was out of town the first time our esteemed guest was joined us on MacroEdge. I was in Mexico. I can't, that happens. The wife comes first, as anyone would let you know. Tonight, Danielle DiMartino Booth, who writes a piece, The Daily Feather, from Quill Intelligence. I must say, and one of my favorite economic books of all time, Fed Up, The Insider's Guide of Why the Federal Reserve is Bad for America. Danielle DiMartino Booth, welcome to MacroEdge Radio.
It is so amazing to be back. And you are absolutely right. The wife always comes first. That is correct.
That is correct. And when she says, we're going to Cancun for a week, we're going to Cancun for a week. So welcome to MacroEdge.
I just got back from Antigua, where I took my husband for his birthday with 7 others. I think they call that a relocation, not a vacation.
That is next on our list, unless we can figure out a way to pull off Grenada and get the exact resort we want. It's one of those, Antigua is one of those places that we've been to. Beautiful island, fantastic food. And folks, if you haven't been there, check it out.
Agreed.
So today is August 15th, historic day. If you look in for those who are economic history buffs, this is the day that Nixon initiated the wage and price freeze in 1971, along with the exit from the gold standard. So it's a very appropriate time as we head into this tumultuous, not evidenced by the equity markets, but banking era time, as far as our central bank is concerned, especially with next Friday and Jackson Hole coming up. Please, the floor is open for you. I would love to get your thoughts of what we may hear with all of the recent data from Jay Powell next Friday.
Yeah, remember last year, his comments lasted all of 15 minutes. And I think he's probably aiming for, the fastest Jackson Hole speech of all time. He's going to stand up and say, it's immigration, and then sit down.
That would be shocking, but I have the funny feeling that we might hear something about inflation, especially after the scorching hot PPI number this week. And that will impact PCE, no doubt in my mind. What do you think?
Well, no, I mean, yes, completely agreed. Just bear in mind the theme of Jackson Hole this coming week is all about the labor market.
Well, I think they've been exposed on that because of the deterioration in the official BLS statistics, but more so, you were ahead of the game in 2023. Some of us pay attention. I heard you saying that we saw some deterioration in the summer of 2023, and again last summer. You were just beating the drum repeatedly. There's something wrong with the underlying labor market, and personally speaking, I think it's a structural measurement issue. It's antiquated. It needs to be updated. There's no arguing that point. However, we seem to have missed the slowdown in the labor market, and we're looking for someone to blame. And to quote the Big Short, they blame immigrants and poor people for everything. It looks like we're going to take that route again.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate. Look, 24 out of the last 30 months, 2.5 years, 24 out of the last 30 months have seen downward revisions to the initially reported payrolls numbers, and that does not even begin to incorporate the quarterly census of employment and wages and the annual benchmark revisions. That's just what they initially report. There is something wrong with the data, and for anybody who is feigning that they're like, oh my God, it's shocking what happened with the July release. It's these revisions are just enormous. I'm like, yeah, okay, for 24 out of the last 30 months. This is nothing new, sweetheart.
That brings us up to the next part of this, which really is disturbing to me. We've seen the revisions, and we've seen drastic revisions for years now, but nothing like we've seen the last 2 years. You were warning about this. We all detected something in the underlying economy wasn't right, especially when we saw the spike in the so-called gig economy, for lack of a better term. The part-time contractor economy is a more accurate phrase, in my opinion. There doesn't seem to be any accurate measurement of participation in this economy, even though that data is readily available through tax collections. Do you feel that there's got to be some methodology introduced to account for that? And perhaps, because let's face it, Uber knows how many contractors they have, just like any trucking company knows how many contractors they have. I have that background, by the way. When you understand that, there has to be a method for reporting that and capturing it in the data and incorporating it in some way with the employment and wages data.
Absolutely, there does. Look, Bloomberg ran with a story early this week that said millions of people not paying their student loans, and they're proud of it. Basically, that was the bottom line. And one of the people they interviewed for this article went to school for 2 years, dropped out, became an Uber driver, got married, had 2 kids, is still an Uber driver. His wife is a stay-at-home mom. And in the interview, he said, look, I'm a contractor. I'm off the grid. And it's only when I turn my button on and off that I'm technically a contracted employee with Uber. Nobody can find me, including the IRS. I'm never going to pay my student loan because I'm completely off the grid. And I'm like, well, no, you're not. Uber knows you're driving for them.
I have a rude awakening for him. The IRS will find you. It is just a matter of time and effort.
If he's incurring income and he expects to file his taxes for a tax refund, guess what that refund's going to pay?
His student loans once again. It's amazing what people are beginning to believe that this is, that is something I've heard quite frequently. You don't have to file your taxes if you get a 1099. I try explaining to the younger generation that you had best file your taxes. If you've ever been in business, you know you have to file quarterlies. It's not an option. You have to sit there and take care of the government's portion. And if you don't, at some point it catches up to you. And that's what I fear. The younger generation seems to think that, don't worry, we'll wait till the next president and we'll get a pardon or a pass on having to pay this back. There's a very unusual cycle occurring as far as personal responsibility in America. And I believe that's part of the problem we're seeing, not just in the job market, but also with some of the younger contractors like you're discussing. They don't seem to want to step forward and be a part of the system. And that's causing an impact on the ability to measure who is actually participating in our society right now as far as employment and work.
That is absolutely true. I think the most telling statistic that I read recently was an article that was run. It was in a local newspaper in College Station, Texas, and it said basically, I used to pocket $90 for a ride from College Station to George Bush International Airport in Houston. I used to pocket $90. Now it's $35 to $40. And that tells you the concentration and the growth of the gig economy has been enormous. And people do simple math. Simple math is simple. That's why they call it simple math. If you determine that you're not going to make, any more than $275 a week collecting unemployment in Texas, you know that you're going to make quadruple that a few years ago, quadruple that working as an Uber driver, you're going to work as an Uber driver. It's a simple equation. But now that's been cut in half because there's so much saturation in this market. Like credible economists right now are predicting that 50% of the U.S. workforce is going to be a gig worker by the end of next year. That's a huge number. We're talking about 170 million strong U.S. workforce.
That's a terrifying figure, because when you take into account the other side of this, and I think you and I have both seen this in the recent data, there is a large surge thanks to AI and restructuring of white collar layoffs,
Look,
which it's incredible to watch, actually.
You know, when there was this cutesy little generation that was like, I'm a quiet quitter, I can work from anywhere, I can dictate the terms, I have the power. You know, it's at some point in the C-suite, the CEO and the CFO said, work from anywhere, ding, ding, ding. Oh, wait, there's an overpopulation in India of overskilled, overeducated workers. Big data, fits on a chip. So whether you're in finance or in accounting or in purchasing or in architecture or a paralegal, you could just ship over everything that they need in terms of resources and get somebody who can work from anywhere, but for a fraction of the cost of your former employee who's now definitely working from home, but not working for you.
One of my, this young lady, Amanda Goodall, has posted some fantastic articles. And recently she posted an article where one of the posters was complaining about, well, I'm not being offered what I was making before, so I couldn't accept the position. This inexperience in the workforce of having to go through cyclical downturns in your career hasn't been impaired or taught to this new generation. And I'm not blaming Gen Z exclusively, boys and girls. This goes all the way up through the millennials and even some members of Gen X. Not sorry if I offended you. I'm married to Gen X, so please don't anyone take that personally. But we seem to have a lack of understanding of how to survive cyclical downturns and then recover and build your wage structure and experience back up, whether it's in the same career stream or a different one. It's just, well, I deserve better because I had this position. I'm going to wait out for the best job. And some people are staying unemployed for well over a year now. Is that disturbing to you? Because it seems like when we need the talent the most, they don't want to put it forth based on the value of that position. They want to dictate the value, and it does not work that way.
It doesn't, but an entire generation is in denial. I mean, I don't know how else to characterize it. There's a graph that I just produced for my Saturday intelligence briefing for my institutional clients that shows that, and it's gone viral on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I always will. That shows that we have a higher percentage of young adults living with their parents than we did at the peak of the Great Depression. I mean, does this generation understand? I'm a mother of 4, and it's the best job, the hardest job, the most challenging thing I've ever had to do, and also the most rewarding. Does this generation understand that they're not going to be parents?
I don't think so. I honest to God don't believe they do, because when I've gone through the process of hiring the younger generation, as you've encountered with many in the business world, there seems to be a disconnect between applying yourself towards a position and earning your way towards the top, and then walking in and saying, I demand 6 figures, a desk, a car, and 2 weeks vacation after I've been here a month. It doesn't seem to be logical, in my opinion, because you and I grew up in a different era. I mean, I'm much older than you are, I'm sure, but believe me. And I don't remember ever having this handed to me and told, this is what you can accept, this is what you can take, and you may make demands once you reach a certain age, management level, etc. That doesn't seem to be imparted by anyone, whether it's the school system, which everyone's blaming, or the parents. And that terrifies me for the future of the country, because we're going to get stagnation at levels that are unbelievable while the rest of the world passes us by.
My greatest concern right now, I just wrote about this week. My greatest concern is for the combined millennial and Gen Z generation. They're 48.5% of U.S. voters. 48.5, damn near half. And what will we see in the midterms? What will we see in the 2028 presidential election if they vote in, as they voted in New York City, somebody to pay their bills and quote unquote stick to the boomers because of all the debt that they've left for this generation? Where will we be at? Look, I lived in Venezuela. I know, and I witnessed with my own eyes what socialism can do to a country. Do they understand what they're voting for? I don't think they do.
I don't think they do either. And I think that that is a terrifying prospect because people who don't understand what happened in the 1980s and early 1990s fail to see how some societies evolved and others devolved. And Venezuela, for those of you who don't know, and Danielle will verify this, was a capitalist paradise for decades. It was the ultimate place for free enterprise, business everywhere, imports, exports. It was off the charts. And now you can't even go visit Angel Falls. It's too dangerous.
It's incredible what's happened to the country. I saw that income inequality, this was the summer of 1995. I saw then, this is prior to Chavez rising to power, what would become of extreme levels of income inequality. And I truly fear for what's coming for this country, because we've got the same levels of income inequality that we did in the Gilded Age. We watch the show on TV, or many people do. But I think too many people laugh it off. But wait until you see what happens at the polls and what could potentially happen to the United States of America. It's really, really frightening to think of how you paid your dues, how I paid my dues. We worked 100 hours a week because we knew that we had to pay our dues in order to move up in organizations and have our career paths, have an upward ascent to them. It was never, the thought never crossed my mind that I would move back in with my parents. It wasn't even an option. And yet, the complacency is just astounding. It's just incredible. I'm not trying to pick on younger people. I will say my children's generation, so 21, 19, 17, and 17, these kids have an incredible work ethic and they want to work. And so I am heartened for the future, because there is a generation that follows these two generations who feel like they've been slighted, and that therefore they deserve, they're entitled to their financial futures care of taxpayers. There is a generation behind them that really wants to work, and that's a great thing.
I think you're correct. I think the very younger end of Gen Z has more motivation and self-motivation than the middle through millennial grouping. And I think I've beaten up on the Gen Z generation enough. And if you want to hear that, you can hear that any Friday night that I get on one of my employment rants. Believe me, boys and girls, it really bothers me, having interviewed some of the workers and seeing that entitlement that you see, but also listening to what they say as to why they believe they are entitled to that, such as you've described. When you have had interviews with individuals, did you bring your mom and dad? I did not know that was the thing now. Did you?
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. I mean, it would be an automatic disqualification for a position. Please.
Exactly. I would laugh them out of my office in 5 seconds. I would lose it right there. I'd say, okay, you can leave now. It's crazy. It's the craziest thing I ever saw. But apparently, there is like 47% of interviewees in that generation bring their parents or one of their parents. So that's a deterioration, not just in education, but also explaining how you have to go in confident and believing in yourself. And I worry about that, because that hits our engineering and science schools much harder. You can't simply sit there and say, well, the Indians and China can produce better engineers than we can. That's total idiocy and insanity. I've seen our engineers. I grew up in the generation when computers were something you plugged into a television with a cassette tape. We all witnessed that evolution. It was not because of China and India. It was our own engineers developing this. And we have the capability and capacity to expand on that. We've got to teach our kids to sit there and jump on that and be assertive in those fields. And we'll kill this subject and get back to the Fed after this, okay?
Oh, the Fed, the Fed, the Fed, the Fed. Yes. Let's talk about Mr. Powell, Esquire.
Esquire, yes. I mean, look, Daniel, just for your education, if you've not read any of my stuff, I have been beating up on Jay Powell since 2018 in the December leaked bailout on Christmas Eve. You guys and boys and girls who aren't aware of that can go look it up. He has made some blunders, which are of historic levels. Like the last year when we cut rates in September, I argued he should have cut rates in May and June or June and July. He waits till September, and I think you were saying, hey, this is going to look political. You better not do that. And he did it. And of course, Donald Trump, rightfully so, said, this looks very political. And now if you go back in hindsight and see the reaction by the markets and what's going on with inflation, it does not seem to be working out so well for him, does it?
No, I mean, and this is somebody whose staff is likely losing their damn minds. They understand that shelter is a huge input to inflation. They know that shelter inflation is coming down and coming down hard. They see the writing on the wall in terms of the inflation mandate, and they know what happened in 2018 and 2019. The CPI actually declined from year to year. And they know that they're completely failing on their employment mandate. Look, if you go back and this is not Danielle opinion at all. This is 12 million American companies that by law are required by the Census Bureau to report their head count on a quarterly basis. If you go back, net job destruction began in the second quarter of 2024. That is when recession began in the United States. And the Fed is completely failing in terms of responding to this economic crisis. And in terms of full circularity, it's pissing off the millennials and the Gen Zers even more.
Speaking on that matter, by not acting in that time period, as we just talked about, and then allowing this to fester to this point in time, and the tariffs, and I know a lot of people are going to argue with me, but having worked in the supply chain for most of my life, when you see the impact on intermediate goods, which finally showed up in PPI, and will show up again more dramatically next month in the PPI reading, which impacts PCE directly, the Fed's favorite gauge. I've never seen the Fed cut, and I've got history except for the time period of 1980 when Volcker did it, where the supercore was above 3%, and we've had a rate cut. So is this like the ultimate quandary? Because if he were to cut dramatically, as Trump wants, and many of some of the governors have indicated, with 50 points, it would be like lighting a fuse on a stack of dynamite on top of gunpowder in a side of a mountain. It will blow up at some point in the very near future.
Well, but I'm going to push back here because you're assuming that purchasing power is miraculously going to manifest. Who's got the purchasing power? You tell me, outside of the top 10%, who has the ability to shoulder higher prices? And if they don't, that is a margin squeeze.
The margin squeeze is going to continue, in my opinion. I think we're going to see reduced margins for the next 4 quarters, unless there is some negotiated settlement in this trade war where we don't have unreasonable levels and we quit ignoring the gorilla in the room that companies cannot afford the tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars it will cost to reshore all of that production, which generally uses low skill labor, which we don't want. We don't want to provide that basis for lower skilled labor. We want higher skilled labor, higher skilled jobs. And we don't have the capacity or capabilities to get the kids into the factories. So why reshore? And why would I increase my cost to reshore? So At some point, it's going to filter through to the consumer. Unfortunately, it's also going to filter through to industry. And that's where the price impacts, I think, are going to be most dramatic, especially if the government decides to subsidize the lowest 50% in our economy with blank checks, which he's talked about already. That scares the hell out of me, Danielle. When we start talking about issuing checks again, like we did during the pandemic, there are unforeseen consequences because of the irresponsible spending habits of the American public as a whole.
Look, that will bring back inflation. Helicopter money will bring back inflation. Repeating universal basic income, the CARES Act, paying people to not pay their rent, the laundry list goes on and on. That will bring back inflation. And the lessons that were not learned will come back to haunt us. And again, that brings us back to the fact that millennials and Gen Zers are 48.5% of U.S. voters. There's a huge risk here that we go back to a very inflationary time in the United States because of demands for stimulus checks. I hope that does not happen. I hope that does not happen. But I think that there's going to be enough of a backlash from what the current administration is doing in the midterms. If not, we'll be lucky if we get all the way to the presidential election.
That truly terrifies me because there is some historical precedent for a deflationary burst after a period of inflation, and I think that has been my scenario, that we see the fade from the tariffs after 2 months, and we begin to see actual deflation in the numbers, and everyone is late to recognize it, including especially when we see asset deflation, which not only supports the boomers, but we have the speculative gamblers in the younger generation, all who became Robin Hoodies, on top of the retirement incomes for millions of boomers, guilty. And when you combine the risk of those asset valuations declining, it almost seems that they have to inflate it to keep this game afloat.
Well, then it's an impossible choice to make. And unfortunately, that is the corner in which the central bank has backed itself. And it's going to come down to choosing the lesser of two evils at this point. Because if you cut retirees' income to too great of an extent, every single 50 basis point reduction in the Fed funds rate takes $70 billion of interest income out of the hands of retirees who happen to own 40% of the stock market. If you cut their income too much and they can no longer re-enter the workforce, you are absolutely playing with fire, because the only thing that will test the stock market, because fundamentals have nothing to do with where we are in the stock market, nothing. But the only thing that will test passive investing flows is if and when you cut retirees' income to a certain extent. And let's say Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's wish comes true for 150 basis points of cuts. So let's say that 3.5% that they're making on their $7.5 trillion in money market funds, you add it all up in terms of what's got variable rate interest income, it comes to north of $13 trillion. If you cut that enough, they'll start to sell the stock that they own. And God help us if that's the case.
I think you've nailed the quandary they put themselves in, because the valuations in their homes are starting to deteriorate rapidly. And you're seeing it in Texas and Florida, two of the largest states, especially for the boomers who have the 3% mortgages or the home that is paid off. They think their homes are valued at X, but they're not taking into account the affordability or the ability of the 48.5% that you talk about to buy those homes. So at some point, the price point has to come down. And boys and girls, that's deflationary. No matter how you sit there and cut it, that's an indication of price deflation and asset deflation. So if they don't want to sell their homes or they can't sell their homes, you're 1,000% correct, to use a certain person's terminology. you have to sell your equities. And that should terrify everyone, especially since we seem to have overvalued not just equities, but corporate bonds in the same theme that you can't lose. So let's just buy something and don't worry about it. The government will eventually bail us out, or the Fed will eventually bail us out.
Those are the working assumptions. You've just summed them up correctly. And we've got bankruptcies running, at the fastest pace since 2010 right now. And there's absolutely no reason to believe that the bankruptcy cycle is not going to continue. People are like, oh, the lag effect is dead. I'm like, no, it's not. The Fed has been high for longer. The Fed has been high for a very long time. The lag effects of high interest rates continue to percolate through the corporate sector, and 2025 differs from 2024 because now we have great big gigantic multi-billion-dollar bankruptcies, whereas last year it was just a handful of them, and now they're coming rapid fire at the greatest pace since 2010.
I'm going to take 5 seconds to promote number one, Danielle DiMartino Booth, The Daily Feather, Substack. Check it out, subscribe. I highly recommend that to our audience. And also MacroEdge.net/ozone, MacroEdge.net/ozone. Get your 2-week free trial. See some of my crazy historical rantings. Read the team's information about the economy, macro, micro, and of course, equity markets. Danielle, I'm going to go back to the Fed real quick because we've got a lot of history occurring in this time period that most people aren't aware of. Your book, Fed Up, really summarized what occurred during the GFC and prior to it. I want to go back to this conflict between Jay Powell and the president. Does this not seem to be paralleling a Mariner Eccles type of outcome where the president just gets fed up with him and demotes him? He can't fire him, but he sure as hell can demote him from being chairman.
He can, and the working assumption right now is that Jay Powell is going to willingly leave in May of 2026. Mariner Eccles, the Federal Reserve building, is named after him. When Truman pushed him aside in 1948, he said, that's fine, but I'm staying. I'm going to finish out my term. It's a 14-year term as a governor. Jay Powell has every right, and the Supreme Court has indemnified him to have the right, which is why Trump is trying to launch a spurious lawsuit against him, claiming gross incompetence because of the cost of renovating plumbing and electricity that has been updated since the damn building was opened in 1937. But Trump's going to lose that legal battle. And if Jay Powell chooses to repeat what Eccles did in 1948 and finish out his governor term, then he'll be around until the end of January 2028.
Won't that be entertaining to listen to speeches from Jay Powell on the circuit?
Look, absolutely. The president can think all day long that he's going to nominate a patsy, a puppet, and he's going to be the puppet master and dictate where monetary policy is going to go. But people don't appreciate that the Federal Open Market Committee on any given meeting is comprised of 12 voters. And, if these voters push back against a presumed puppet, then you're going to have mutiny. You're going to have mutiny on the Federal Open Market Committee. You're going to have dissent like you've never seen before. And all of this is extremely probable, not just possible, but probable.
Well, there's your wow statement, boys and girls in the audience. I remind you, this is something that I agree with Danielle 100% will happen, not just because of the Federal Reserve's historical position on this. They didn't name it the Mariner Eccles building just because he was a legendary Fed governor and chair, getting us through the Great Depression, World War II, and the inflationary period post-World War II. it was because he defied the executive branch as his role as the chairman of and governor of a private company. And people don't read the law and understand that. So that brings us to William McChesney Martin and LBJ. We had that clash also. You remember that. You studied this. I don't think people understand the history of this heading through Nixon, Carter, and into Volcker. Do you?
No, I mean, I've got boys dying in Vietnam. LBJ famously threw William McChesney Martin at his ranch in the Texas Hill Country up against a wall after doing basically a home invasion on New Year's Eve and flying him down to Texas, basically kidnapping the guy and threatening him. And McChesney Martin, who famously said, it's the Fed's job to take away the punch bowl, just as the party's getting roaring. McChesney Martin pushed back and did so successfully. And it wasn't until Nixon was able to put Arthur Burns in the position, as Trump wants to put an Arthur Burns in the position to replace Powell, that things really started to go badly with inflation in America. But McChesney Martin, through 5 different administrations, fought against that. People think that Paul Volcker is the hero of the Federal Reserve, and I greatly admire Paul. I met him when he was alive. He was, I'm 5'3". He was, bless his heart, like 6'8", gigantic man. But he appreciated the history of McChesney Martin because he knew that there were people who had stood up to prior administrations in order to protect Federal Reserve independence.
That's the funny thing, because I'm a student also. I respect the history. I don't always agree with it, and I don't always agree with the policies and some of the approaches the Federal Reserve has taken. But Volcker was the architect of leaving the gold standard, letting the dollar float. Most people don't study that part of his history as an advisor to Nixon. But when he became Fed chair, he made one blunder, and he vaguely admitted that, and that was cutting rates in 1980. But to the surprise of everyone, him and Reagan were able to work things out. And Reagan supported his stance on the higher rates to kill the inflation bugaboo once and for all. We fast forward to Powell, and I got my problems with Powell are the 2018 bailout of the banks, the 2022 missing the inflation, and then the September cut in 2024. And now we're almost too late to do anything because, as you've stated, and many others have, the employment situation is a lagging indicator. It's always the last data to recognize that we're in a recession. Usually it goes negative several months into a recession. And I think Powell's quandary, as you call it, is if he cuts too much now, it looks political, or that he's submitted to Trump. And if he doesn't cut and tries to take the Volcker approach, he'll get demoted. There'll be more distortions and problems with the market. Personally speaking, I think it will be a shock to the markets to see Jay Powell demoted. I don't think that's going to be healthy for the American economy and especially our bond markets. What is your take on that?
No, I think you're right. I think that it will cause a lot of undue market disruption, and we don't even know which direction actually yields would go in that particular set of circumstances. I think the bond market is the biggest toss-up right now because you've got these conflicting drivers. You've got this deflationary impulse coming out of the U.S. housing market, and it cannot be denied. I mean, all of these, fly-by-night Airbnb jocks, as I like to call them, their investment thesis is being so severely tested right now. And classically, the huge private equity firms are liquidating their portfolios and selling to these Airbnb jocks who are told that they can make millions and millions. But you too can be a investing millionaire tomorrow. That's not going to work out very well. So I'm not even convinced in terms of where bond yields go. if there is disruption, because there are these conflicting drivers of recession at the same time, that if you're incorporating job losses, there's an increasingly diminished purchasing power among U.S. consumers, while, by the way, delinquencies go absolutely through the roof.
Well, I'm gonna cheat and open your book, because if I ever meet you or see you at Texas or Antigua, I will have you autograph the book, if you can. But
I would be happy to. Yes.
Chapter 9, for those who are not aware, is Luddite, and Greenspan made a statement that opens that chapter, which, quote, not only have individual financial institutions become less vulnerable to shocks from underlying risk factors, but also the financial system as a whole has become more resilient. That's Alan Greenspan in 2003. And that was the FOMC meeting, the conference in Wyoming, where Rajan gave his famous dissertation on CDS and the risk to the financial markets, and that this was a danger, as you outlined in that chapter. I feel that we've returned full circle to that time period 20 years later, and that we're not paying attention to what's happening underneath the hood. You once famously said in 2019 that the bubble mania warning would be when subprime auto started to deteriorate. Well, it's deteriorated, crashed, and the most profitable enterprising position is not Airbnb. It is to buy a tow truck and learn how to become a repo man.
Absolutely.
What is your take on the risks of overconfidence in our modernization of the financial system, leaving air bubbles underneath the surface that at some point are going to pop?
Well, I mean, we're witnessing it in real time, right? We had a subprime auto lender pull the plug, and this is maybe 2 weeks ago, and say, we're no longer making auto loans. And I'm like, okay, but you're an auto lender. So if you're no longer making auto loans, then you're saying you're out of business. And they're looking out over the horizon. They're seeing such magnificent losses in auto loans that they made when the government was handing out money like candy, and saying it's simply not worth it in this environment to continue going as a lender. They're putting themselves out of business. These are extraordinary times that we're seeing. And the distress on household balance sheets is nothing like we've ever seen. It's not 2008, 2009. It's of a greater magnitude, because countless Americans believed that they would never have to pay their student loans. And now they can't get mortgage modifications. Their FICO scores are absolutely crashing. The government will garnish their wages. The government will take their income tax refunds away from them. And the implications for household finances are just, they're indescribable. They're unquantifiable. I can't tell you how bad it's going to get. And if it was not for lenders extending and pretending and modifying every sort of loan that exists. I mean, Klarna just had a 64% increase in their loan loss provisions in the latest quarter, because people they were lauding the fact that their relationship with Apple Pay and DoorDash has gone through the roof. Hey, our DoorDash and Apple Pay revenues have gone up 37% year over year. Yay! That means that people are like putting food on layaway. But guess what? Food's consumed. So those are just losses. They're just flat out losses. Nobody right now can quantify what the distress is going to be like for the household sector.
You've nailed that right on the head. And the thing that scares me about this is most people don't understand incremental inflation and how retailers apply that to pass costs down to the lowest strata of America's economy. Everyone sees the dramatic price increases in cars and they say, well, they're offering 10-year financing now, so I can afford it. Folks, 10-year financing on a car, it has no value after 4 years. So if you're financing something for 10 years, you're not only losing your mind, you're losing the value of anything at the end of that period if it doesn't get repossessed first. Moving on to this, because you hit a very important subject, the BNPL craze, buy now, pay later, the quote unquote, get your paycheck 3 days ahead craze on a card and don't worry about it, we'll charge you a very low interest rate. All of these financial innovations by actually reinstitute quantitative easing at some point and buy all this ABS, and in the same token, turn around and get a bailout from the federal government, because once they see the asset price deterioration for the boomers and for the youth and the default rates increasing, they're going to have to bail everyone out, or we will see a deflationary recession or worse. Do you really think that they're going to sit there and let that happen? Or do you think that the Fed's hand will be forced with a new Fed, however Donald Trump decides to structure it, and with the Congress up for re-election? I'm scared of these guys going into an election year next year, just like you are. I think they'll fold quickly.
And if they do, again, you release the Kraken, because baby boomers, they're not messing around anymore. They cannot go back into the workforce. Baby boomers went back into the workforce in 2001 when their portfolios, just took it on the chin. Baby boomers went back into the workforce in 2007. The median age of a baby boomer today is 71. Americans over the age of 70 own 40% of the stock market. You cannot annihilate by going to the zero bound and relaunching quantitative easing, which is what you're talking about. You're talking about the destruction of upwards of $600 billion of interest income out of the hands of baby boomers, which will force them to sell their stocks. The Fed is stuck. The Fed is trapped.
So with their back up against the wall, do you think they're going to be forced to initiate quantitative easing, or will they allow a recession and hope that they can temper it, restrict it, prevent it from getting worse? I don't have that kind of faith in the Federal Reserve. I still think, like you have stated in the past, they're fighting the last economic war. They're not fighting the one in the future. And it's not a fault of their methodology. It's just the psychology of economics. We measure the past. We don't measure the future. Is that the danger that we're facing, that we're going to sit there and see perhaps enough votes to add long-dated treasuries and MBS to the Fed's balance sheet after Powell's ejected? And that scares the hell out of me.
If that's the case, again, you will end up crashing the stock market, because the baby boomers will revolt. They cannot go back into the workforce in their 70s in mass, as they did in 2001 and in 2007. They cannot go back to work. And if they cannot go back to work, and the Federal Reserve lowers the risk-free interest income being paid to them, they will be forced to sell the 40% of the stock market that they own. And that will, for the very first time in the history of the United States, test passive investing. And the millions of Americans who've got money flowing into their 401ks on an automated basis, every single time they receive their paycheck, they'll say, oh God, the stock market's falling out of bed. I need to reallocate my assets in my 401k. You'll end up with a waterfall event that will simply test passive. You cannot test passive. You cannot stress test passive. I cannot emphasize that enough.
Well, considering the dark pools from private equity, that's what scares me, is there's no way to stress test that either. And we do not know nearly how much insanity that's gone through.
Yeah, no. And why don't we just open up private equity so that 401k investors can buy into it and catch, the most serrated, sharp falling knife of all time. It's classic to invite the retail investor in at the very tail end of a cycle. Classic.
Well, I've got one more question from a listener, and it's about one of our favorite posters on Twitter, Randy Woodward. And his comment was from several days ago. Oh, go ahead, please.
No, love me some Randy. That's all.
Same here.
He's a great. He's a QI pro. He's been a longtime client. Bought 100 copies of Fed Up, and gave them to his clients. We're longtime friends. He's fabulous.
He is one of the most knowledgeable individuals on FinTwit, boys and girls. If you're not following Randy Woodward or Danielle, follow them both, please. You'll learn a lot. So his comment was, okay, it's a Fed theory. They had been measuring average rents for a long time, but they realized those rents included leases that had terms, let's say a year on average, which meant rent levels wouldn't change for some period of time. So they thought, what if we had a measurement for the new rent levels on pre-existing units? What are the rents on those units? If new renters were able to rent those units for a lower rate, that would mean all the maturing leases might well have to adjust lower as well. But that would take time to work through the existing leases. So the theory is that new leases may tell us where the total average leases are headed. The beach certainly supports new rents lead average rents. Do you believe that his theory, and this is a question from a listener, thank you, Kalani, that has some validity to it, although it's a slower process when you use that measurement tool the Cleveland Fed is applying?
We actually have full faith, and at QI Research, we have published extensively on the fact that new rents dictate the market. And right now, if you look at census quarterly data, which is very lagged, you've got 50% of new apartments exiting the construction pipeline being leased in the first 3 months, meaning half are not. And that tells you, with home ownership levels declining again, we have more young adults living with their parents than we did at any time since the Great Depression. If that's the case, then you know exactly where shelter inflation is going. I know exactly what Randy's talking about. And that is highly problematic for the Fed because they're focused on tariff inflation when they should be focused on shelter deflation.
100% agree again, because shelter deflation is not only the selling price, because a lot of the selling prices are distorted by incentivization by the builders, but also the rate buy downs that Melody and Amy Mixon and others have been talking about from the MacroEdge team. And Ulysses Awesome, the other individual that interviewed you last time, he's one of our best as far as real estate is concerned. When you start listening to that and think, okay, take the incentives out and start measuring it, I do believe we're in a cycle where we will see 20 to 40% declines in home prices. And that traps not only the Fed, but the boomers. Everyone says, oh, they need to sell their homes to the younger generation. It's financially impossible for them to do so in many cases, especially considering their locations in Arizona or Texas or Florida, where the jobs are not. The jobs that these kids who are graduating from school can't find their particular fields to engage in.
You're absolutely correct. Look, who's going to buy a McMansion right now when they have no kids? I mean, there is a demographic disconnect of biblical proportions here. And it's not going to be resolved for generations plural. And that's why we see that in 2024, according to the Census Bureau, 17% of all home transactions were to multi-generational households. And I think we're going to continue to see the Italianification, Italy, of the U.S. housing market. There are going to be more multi-generational households going forward. And there's nothing that we can do to stop this, but it will gravely harm the U.S. housing market because of this demographic disconnect.
Well, I'm hoping to get Chris Whalen on in the near future to talk about this issue, but I have to get your input from a Federal Reserve perspective and an economist perspective. The privatization of Fannie and Freddie and the impact on housing, it seems to me to almost be a trough made for private equity, waiting to create another disaster similar to what we witnessed in 05 through 09. And folks, please understand, I'm not a Greenspan fan in that regard. I think the mistakes he made from 98 to 2005 were abysmal as far as interest rates and incentivizing the gambling mentality. What do you think could be some of the consequences and the risk for the Fed should they decide to privatize the GSEs?
You know, these are very difficult questions to address. Um, especially because of where we are in the real estate cycle right now. I think I think it's a tall order to reignite speculation in housing right now. And so, you know, I'd like to hear from Chris. I'd like to hear from others. Um, but I don't necessarily believe, again, given where we are in the housing cycle, that you'd be able to generate the same amount of speculation that you did or would have been able to do so in 2005, 2006. I'm not there. And again, I'm not a mortgage guru. I'm not an expert in this field necessarily, but I don't see the animal spirits being unleashed because of where we are, and especially when you roll demographics into it.
Fantastic. I'm with you on this. I've got more questions than answers, and I really feel like it will become a private equity pig trough where at some point they're going to demand a government bailout or the Fed monetize the ABS. Of course.
Look, okay, that part's easy. Yes, they will.
So I've got a few minutes. I don't want to abuse our time because you have been so generous with our audience with the questions, and I know I can be a pain in the butt with some of the questions that I ask because I'm sort of a history geek when it comes to the Fed. What do you see proceeding in the next 60 days? I think this is a very interesting period in American history with the conflict with the Federal Reserve, the economy overheating if you look at equities, but underperforming if you're looking at the lower 60% of our society. What do you think they're going to have to do? One, to sit there and stabilize prices, and two, to try to ensure that the employment situation doesn't deteriorate any further, as a rate cut in September and October still takes 6 to 9 months to reach Main Street and have any visible impact.
Well, you bring up the critical issue here, and that's that. Forget about the rate cuts to come, because yes, there'll be a lag effect in terms of when they manifest in the economy. We're still dealing with the after effects of the Fed's interest rate levels being too high for too long. We have not gotten through that phase yet. We're still in it. We're still in the thick of things right now. So even if the Fed was to act dramatically, and again, that risks unleashing very nervous retirees. There's no easy quick fix in the next 60 days at all. And we've just had Putin and Trump. Putin could have flown 10 hours to Washington, D.C., or he could have flown 10 hours to Alaska. He decided to and force Trump to fly across the country in order to get to Alaska. And the result was a complete stalemate. We've got another 90-day extension of what's going to come of tariff discussions with China. Again, I think the Fed is trapped. I don't think that you can pull a rabbit out of a hat here in the next 60 days. I think that's an impossibly tall order.
So this theoretical money on the sidelines, and someone's asking this question, and I'll be honest, I'm one of the people who have money on the sidelines. I'm a precious metals geek, have been since the 80s, since the 70s, actually. God, I'm showing my age now, as a teenager. And I believe that you have to have some insurance. And I also believe heading into my later years that I should have it tied up in T-bills and reliable instruments. That money's not going to come off the sidelines out of the money market funds, is it?
You mean into the stock market?
Yes, that's what someone's asking. I don't believe it will. I think it's going to stay safe, even if it goes down to 2.5%, 3%. I think they're going to hold on to it because as the older generations, the boomers, witnessed what happened to their accounts in 2007 through 2009, they remember that. I don't think they want to go through a repeat of it.
But they can't. They could have gone through a repeat of it in 2007, 2009 because they were able to go back into the workforce and make it back. They cannot make it back now. And you're absolutely right. The money's going to the money on the sidelines. That is a myth created by sell side investment banks. Period. End. And it's what they do to keep their clients invested in the stock market. It's just classic. You talk your book. That's all it is. It's nothing more than talking your book. Money on the sidelines is a myth right now because baby boomers' median age is 71 years old. Period. End.
I'm not quite there yet, but boy, there are mornings where I feel like it. Danielle, I wish to thank you profusely for everybody at MacroEdge and our audience. Please let everyone know where they can read your works daily about Quill Intelligence, and plug your book one more time, because I think people have a misunderstanding on Federal Reserve history, and your book outlines one of the most turbulent modern periods of the Federal Reserve, and it really explains to how we got here in that time period and why the decisions being made now are occurring.
Look, I will toot my horn, and I have a huge ego. I'm not going to lie, but Fed Up is more relevant now than it was when it was first published. So, and I recorded it myself with full blown pneumonia. So it's not like a sexy voice. I was actually sick. But if you haven't listened to it or read it, please do so. And we publish the Daily Feather every single trading day of the year. Come to DiMartinoBooth.substack.com. Love to have you. Join the Daily Feather reading community. And if you run billions of dollars and millions of dollars, come to QI Research. We have an incredible institutional following. Our Bloomberg chat room is on fire every single day, and you learn more and get more value add than you could ever imagine. So I'd love to have you, regardless of where you are on the income spectrum and the economic and finance educational spectrum. Come and join the community.
Danielle, thank you so much. And I've learned more tonight. And I always learn when I watch you on television or listen to your podcasts, which I do frequently. So thank you once again for joining us on MacroEdge Radio. And thank you for your time on behalf of everybody at MacroEdge.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Everyone, macroedge.net/ozone, macroedge.net/ozone. Get your 2-week free trial for the MacroEdge team. And Danielle, good night now.
Night, night.